Thank you everyone for joining us this evening for the Cerulean Arts Collective October-November exhibition, which features the work of Laura Eyring, Fran Gallun, Shawn, Hildreth, Janice, Merendino, and Jeff Thompson. So we are going to walk through the gallery and visit each artist's space. And we are recording this, so if you want to see it again, we'll post it on our YouTube channel. You can also forward it to anybody who may have missed it. And we ask that you please stay muted during the tour, except for the artists. And let's see, what else? We are open, so you can come down and see the show in person. We're open Wednesday through Friday, 10 to 6, Saturday, Sunday, 12 to 6. And everything is also available on our website. So you can see it there as well. I'll put a link to it in the chat for you. All right, so we'll make our way down the aisle. Make sure your seatbelts are on. And our first artist is Fran Gallun. Hello, Fran.
Hi everybody. Thanks for coming. Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and the work in this show?
Yeah, sure. So the work in this show is all from 2020 and 2021. And I will say that the COVID thing, which is still ongoing, it was had a lot of silver linings, and one of them was reduction of many other obligations and possibilities. So I'm so lucky to be able to be in the studio because nobody else is there, and so I got a lot of work done. These are all fanciful still lifes, and I will say that way back in the 80s, I was painting still life, but from the actual objects and the tabletop setups, and also very big, brushy, colorful, expressive canvases. And through many iterations that too many to oops, sorry, too many to go now. I came back to still life about 5 years ago, and it was kind of a shock. I had been doing a lot with really imaginary landscape and the horizontal line and all these things that some of you may recall. But and on top of one of those appeared some vessels and objects, and it was a shock. It's like, hey, I did this. I can't do this again. But it was back, and it's very different because I'm, except for this little grouping that you see now, which are tiny, they're 5 by 7. They're all made up. So they're all imaginary still life with the vessel shape, lots of surface work. This one is a monoprint, is a officially titled multiple drop monoprint, monotype, I should say, because there's no etching on the plexiglass plate that I work on as the surface. So these are cut out stencils, and each color represents another run through the press. And it also finishes with collage. Maybe you can make out some collage pieces on top of that. So I have been using the the press at Fleischer Art Memorial, where I teach. So it's available to me, which is really nice. And I've found that that is a very, it's always wonderful to be able to switch, shift gears a little and try another medium, sometimes sculpture, sometimes a whole other shift to clarify what's happening for you. These are colored pencil on painted paper. So the paper was quite dark, like navy blue, and here are those horizontal stripes. This is a big part of my work over these years, these bands of objects, shapes, and these were really, I have to say, doodles. I love the word doodle, and I respect it very much, because I think it's important to just let your hand move and keep out of the way. So this colored pencil on painted paper, there was that month, if you recall, in COVID, like May of 2020, and the advice was don't go out, don't go anywhere, just it's going to be on the rise and all that. So I brought some simple materials home, and I did these at home. That's very, very different for me. The studio space is a sanctuary. So anyway, these were paired next to the monotype very brilliantly by Tina. I wouldn't have thought of that. So that's my moment to say thank you for doing such a beautiful job with arranging the work and being so thoughtful about it and making it look better than it does in the studio. These big canvases, there are 4 of them in this show, and they are all old still life. And I've painted, now I'm painting over a lot of the old canvases from the old days, not all of them. Some of them will survive, but these have been painted over, sometimes with a color, sometimes with gesso. And then these images of these archetypal vessel shapes, leaf patterns, you can see the collage in that. So everything is acrylic and collage. When I ended the time of doing those big still lifes, they were oil back in the 80s. I shifted to work on paper, and that was so liberating to be off the canvas and to be able to, oh gosh, tear it up or paint over it or add to it. And Len, don't do that, Len. Thanks. So collage has been part of my work for since the 90s, really. Some of it in 3-dimension and now back in 2-dimension, but I love the freedom of collage. There's just something about being able to add these shapes that is very freeing for me. And you may notice that some are also the stencil shape. You can see next to the cup, there are 2 vessels, bottles that are one in front of the other, and those are from shapes, patterns that I have used over and over. So so they appear, those particular, there are many shapes that appear and reappear. And the bigger one behind it is actually newspaper. I've started using newspaper also, which I find very amusing. A lot of how I feel about the work is recycling. I'm thrilled to be using these old canvases again. I love the collage. The collage is mostly, except for the newspaper, my own painted paper. And there are piles of scraps and things and pieces. And this work in this show, I felt very, well, much freer, really. I just let myself, just do it. and not, gosh, you know, we get into this whole conversation of does it fit in with the other work, and is it, all those things that we tell ourselves or wonder about or worry about. Yeah, so I really let it rip. That's how it felt to me. Anyway, and in between these are also small, like 6x8, and I would take the pen and ink I love and just draw. That's the wall of the studio, but kind of a takeoff with other and the do a little drawing, these little made up still lifes, and just really, really very playful. And this one is, you can see it's like the pink still life that we just looked at. This is a little drawing of it, trying to decide what's going on here and what do I need to change. And you may notice that that blue bowl isn't there anymore, and neither are the grapes, and so forth. Right, and the other one in the upper left is also wondering about it. So doing a little drawing of it. So I don't sketch or plan anything ahead of time. It's kind of backwards. I do, sometimes I'll do a little one to understand what's happening in a bigger one. Yeah, so this is a view of my studio. That's its title. That's a big table. I work, a lot of times I work flat on these two big 4x8 tables. That's one of them, looking out the window on the left. This one, I have to say, if I can make myself laugh, I've succeeded. So here's the view out the window. It's a newspaper, as you can see, and it's they're not contiguous, really. The one I included the rainbow. You remember everybody had rainbows up and be positive and all those wonderful things. We don't see them anymore, but that was just, that's a little nod to the era. And the lower right quadrant there says American Dream back there in on a big billboard back there. It's some enormous hulk of a thing on the New Jersey Turnpike. Anyway, it says American Dream. I don't usually comment on what's happening in the world, because I find being able to be in the studio and create my own worlds is a much nicer place to be. So all of this, I'm laughing because that's the back wall, and I have lots of postcards up of other work and things I like, and they're interpreted there as just little scraps of paper. So I think that's pretty hilarious, really. So, and obviously not a takeoff on the stuff on the table, the thermos, the paper towels, the little cup with ruler in it, etc. These are 9x12, and they're on masonite, also recycled from a different era. I had done mixed media, years ago, in a whole other way, and just decided to gesso over a bunch of them and draw into the wet gesso. Gesso is a what is gesso? It's some kind of what is it? It's, help me out here, people. Limestone. It's not limestone. It's some kind of compound from the ancient days, like the Renaissance, that covers a canvas and makes it non-porous. And you can gesso anything and paint over it. It'll be non-porous, and you have a nice clean surface. But so I'm drawing into the wet gesso, and so kind of scraping up a little bit of what's behind from the old stuff. I do like the idea of layers and slight transparencies to be able to see what's behind, because I feel that that's the human condition, that we all have all these layers. So here you can see the pencil work and the bumpy surface, that's whatever was behind there. And so do the drawing on the gesso and then use these this fluid acrylic that come in these little bottles that are just so lovely to work with. And so this was a series like in June, and I just had a wonderful time doing one after another, just making it up. This has a little oil pastel in it. I don't know if you could see that, but kind of creates another kind of surface background. Yeah, they have this one. So often, I mean, it's the basic same things. There's a vessel shape, a vase shape, there's a tabletop, there's the diagonal lines, a bowl of something that's usually oranges or some kind of round fruit, and a container with some stuff. That one is called chips and fries because it looks much more like chips and fries than fruit or the pencils that were in that little container. Right. And
Fran,
yes.
I was going to ask you, since a lot of your shapes repeat themselves, do they have a symbolic meaning for you?
That's a great question. When I was back in the 80s doing the still life, I had and I still have it, a kind of a compote, you could call it, kind of a stemmed bowl, and it felt very female, and it kind of represented maybe me, I don't know. But the vessel shape is so ancient and everywhere, ubiquitous and forever, and inside, outside, humble, from the beginning. So there was a while when I was doing a lot with ancient language, sometimes Hebrew, sometimes, I mean, like I have a book on cuneiform, which I just think is amazing, those shapes in clay. So there is something archetypal in that shape. So thanks for that question. And the flatness now, I'm not trying to create real space. It's some kind of space, but it's not real. And you can see, I don't know, well, you probably see that the big orange vase is collage, but so are the red fruit and the little blue vase and those flowers that are that are detached and floating are from a travel catalog. So they have places you can, if you look up close. I mean, things like that are just, it's so funny and so much fun and enjoyable, and why not? So it's like, hey, I can have a lot of fun now. Yeah.
Was it always fun, or was there times it wasn't?
It's a good question for everyone, right? Right? Well, no, sometimes you get really overly worried or serious or questioning and doubtful and all those things. One of the reasons I left painting oil on canvas was and embraced the paper freedom was that it just wasn't fun. And once I got into the mixed media, it was in a workshop, a 10-day workshop. It's like, oh my God, that was a watershed event. It's like, I'm free. It's like, I knew this had to be fun. I remember using all this stuff. I love this stuff. So I felt very liberated. So So it's nice to be back on canvas and have fun with it. These are, I think that has to do with age too. So I just want to put that in there. That's one of the great rewards of doing this long enough that it's like, okay, I'm doing this. This was a big drawing. These are 6 in this series, and it was, I guess, about 22 by 30. And I really loved the surface and all these lines and things and stuff. And it just sat there for quite a while, years. And in this COVID time, I was just like, let me see what's down here and I'll just use it. So I cut it up, and things become instantly better when you cut them up. I mean, you can't do that with everything, of course, but and then these little vessel shapes, also cut from patterns, little patterns, were I was just having fun doing those using magazine paper. Some of it is my own paper, but some of it is magazine paper and from art magazines, and some of it is artwork. So I'm appropriating, but they look very different. And whatever appealed to me, the color, the surface, etc. And so then I made these 6 with, I think the series is called Rediscovered. Right. That one is called Flight of Fancy. I don't know about that title, but it's okay. Yeah, are people allowed to ask questions now, or do you wait till the end? You don't want to.
Well, maybe we'll hold them to the end.
Okay.
Once everyone speaks their piece. It's a great collection, Fran.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So now we're heading into Laura Eyring's gallery. Laura?
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll start with a little bit of my background before talking about my work. But I started with a music background. My father's a musician. My sister's also a musician. And we had tons of classical music growing up from a ridiculously young age. And piano had been my focus for many years. And so about when I turned 18, I decided to take a gap year. I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was supposed to do piano, and I kind of felt, pressured to continue with music, just my own pressure. So I took a gap year and, played a lot of piano, kept studying. And then I took a night course at the academy. And within about the first hour of walking in the door, I was just totally hooked. And I worked that year to get my portfolio together. And the following year I was full-time, and I loved my 4 years there. I was one of the younger students, so I was just looking up to everybody and kind of trying to figure out what I was doing. I had fantastic instructors there, and it was just a really wonderful 4 years. And then after art school, I just kept painting, and I was waitressing and cleaning houses and picking up all kinds of odd jobs to get by. And I did that for about 10 years. And then when I turned 30, I was actually in my early 30s. I broke my wrist very badly, and I was out of work for 5 months. And it was the catalyst to get me to go back to school. And everyone was like, "Oh my God, you're giving up art." I was like, "No, I'm giving up waitressing. I got to find some other way to support this art habit." So I went back, and for 4 years, I had to go all the way back. I got a chemistry degree from Drexel. And then I kept drawing the whole time. That was the great thing about having a music background is, with art, people think you kind of wait for inspiration to strike you. But with music, you're practicing every day. You can't miss practice time. And so that was a really good foundation for art, where it was like, oh, you just draw every day, and that's great. And so even if I don't get to paint in oils every day, I always draw every day. So let's see. So after I got my chemistry degree, I got a job doing water analysis for the water department, which is where I've been for 20 years, met my husband there, and we have 2 teenagers. And, you know, so raising kids and having a full-time job also didn't leave a lot of time for art, but I was drawing and I wound up illustrating children's books. I did 4 children's books, and I did a lot of, like, you know, drawing for kids at school. I'd go into the daycare, or I'd go into the, you know, classroom and do a project or do a demo for the kids when they were little. And then 5 years ago, I got cancer and had a pretty rough year, made it through chemo, and, you know, I have a really good prognosis. But when that was all over, I was like, you know, now that the kids are teenagers, I really want to get back to my oil painting. So I basically took over the laundry room downstairs and set up a studio and pulled out my easel and thought it was a really good time to kind of rebrand. Like, what do I want to do? How do I want my work to look? I'd always done quite a few landscapes, but it had always been with the thought of being a plein air painter. And when I started thinking about it, the period of art that I love is Art Deco, Gustav Klimt, the early turn of the century, kind of the end of the Impressionist era, more decorative, a lot of the illustrators around the turn of the century. But anything Art Deco just really moves me. And when I look at Klimt's painting, I just am, you know, floored. And I thought, well, that's my inspiration there in terms of people that I look up to. And then I thought about my palette, and I just took off all the earth tones. And I think part of it was kind of, I love saturated color. And I want to, get that really intense color. So where the drawing's still pretty realistic, because I'm doing a lot of sketching on site, but all the painting is done in the studio, and everything's oil that is here today. My sketching is just, pencil or colored pencil, but it's very rough. And so when I'm in the Wissahickon, or the 3 that we're looking at here are Maine. We went up to Swans Island last summer. We weren't sure if if my daughter was going to be able to get vaccinated in time. So we booked an Airbnb on an island off the coast of Maine, which was awesome. I love the landscape up there, and I did a lot of drawing. So those 3 that you're looking at are Maine. Most of the other paintings in this collection and this show are the Wissahickon. I'm in the Mount Airy section of Philly, so I'm always in the Wissahickon. So anyway, I'm losing my train of thought here. So I was thinking about palette, and I just use red, yellow, and blue and white. I took black off. I took all the earth tones off, and I wanted very saturated color. And then I mix everything. I mix about 50 or 60 colors on a huge palette. And actually, when I realized, like, I need to include some sort of neutrals, or else the color is just a little too much. So when I mix them, I don't even call them neutrals. I call them my chocolates. And then I can mix them, because otherwise I can't get myself to mix brown. But if I call it white chocolate, dark chocolate, or milk chocolate, I can do it. So that's kind of how I think of the color. And then I really like using very small brush strokes. I only use 2 or 3 different brushes, and I'm just kind of looking at, it's not quite pointillism, but when I look at a forest or when I look at trees, I don't see big masses. I see little bits of color. And so that's kind of what I'm trying for with the painting. And I like to really pump up the color. So, I definitely take a lot of liberty rather than trying to paint what I'm looking at. So I use a lot of deep blues, a lot of, yellows and purples. I do some color studies before I start painting. I love going into hardware stores and just sort of grabbing all those color swatches. And I have a whole box of them. And so when I when I plan a painting, I'll plan the palette out. But I'm not doing like full-size drawings. I kind of let things emerge. I have the general design, but I let a lot of things kind of come into play as I'm working on it. The other thing I like to do when I paint is I have very upbeat music going, because I tend to get really critical. I hear that like critical voice, like, oh my God, it doesn't look right. And so to drown that out, I'm listening to stuff, definitely not classical, because when I hear classical, I just realize it's been like 40 years since I've practiced and I start to feel really guilty. So I listen to like Cat Stevens and Pink and Bare Naked Ladies, the Monkees, lots of stuff from the 70s, and anything that's got kind of a very upbeat feel to it. The other thing is just kind of my time constraint, because my kids are still living at home. I have 2 teenagers. They're both in high school. So even though they both have a foot out the door, I still want to be around. And so my painting time is usually 6 to 7 every morning. And that's kind of my constraint. I get up early and I like to, get work done. And I know I only have that hour, so I tend to paint pretty quick. Everything in this show was done since April of 2021. So the big one here on the right was the first one I did. Part of the problem with my space is that I can only paint when it's warm enough to have the laundry room door opened, which is basically like April to November. And the rest of the year I just draw. So that one on the right was done in April, and then everything else was kind of followed after that. This one here is the only one with a critter in it. It's got the blackbird. I was originally going to make it a red-winged blackbird, but I realized once I did it that the red would have just been a little too harsh with the rest of the palette. But I was thinking I might want to do more birds in my trees and in my landscapes, because they are fun to paint and they give kind of a just kind of a fun feel to it. So I guess what I'm striving for my landscapes is, I think of art as kind of a way to escape, that I don't want to imitate nature. I want to look at nature and get inspired, and then go to my canvas and capture that feeling of color and light and movement. And so that's what I'm thinking of. I want to recreate the feeling I have when I'm in the Wissahickon, or when I'm, just hiking around. And I realized I became a whole lot happier when I stopped doing plein air painting, just picking the bugs out of that wet oil paint, and shuddering every time a wind kicks up and your canvas is flying around, and I just can't cope with it anymore. But yeah, so this is the first one that I did during the season, and I was kind of thinking about this for a long time. Where this is 36 by 48, which is pretty much the largest I work, because it's the biggest thing I can fit in my car. And when I go bigger, then I work as diptychs or triptychs. But this was really fun to paint, and I really enjoyed mixing all these colors. And it was early. It was just when, things were starting to bloom, and, leaves were just starting to pop out. I do take a lot of photos too. And I find kind of, my rule of working from photos has always been that they have to be my own pictures, and that they're just kind of a reminder of maybe the structure of a tree, or, the structure of foliage, but not really, that's kind of all it is. It's kind of like a visual reminder of something. Let's see, I think that's about, let me see what the next one. Oh, this one on the right. Yes, this is the Wissahickon, the path that has lots of, stones on the side. And I just love those trails. It's such a treasure to have that in our city limits. And I'm there, all kinds of weather. But yeah, it's a challenge to paint, because there is so much going on. But again, I'm mixing probably 30 different blues and greens to add to the painting.
Do you lay them out like on a big palette, did you say?
Yeah, my palette's probably like, oh, I should measure it. It's probably about 2 feet by 3 feet. And then I allow time where, you know, I'm just mixing colors. And then that usually stays for like 2 or 3 days. Actually, usually 3 days. I can get 3 days out of a palette. So I'm also kind of conscious, like when I mix my paints, because I usually have more time on the weekends, then I'm painting furiously for those 3 days, and then, you know, kind of going back and just doing some, you know, touch-ups or whatever during the other days, and then I'll mix a whole nother palette. So I have about 5 or 6 easels in my studio, so I can work on things as they're drying, but I tend to paint pretty quickly. A lot of people always ask me how long something takes, and I always say this took about 35 years, because, you know, I paint quickly, so I do almost a painting a week. But what took a long time was to figure out how to get to the point where you're getting across what you want to get across. I mean, if there's probably not an artist alive that hasn't had many frustrating moments, and it's how you kind of work past that. And what I try to do too is I try to always finish a painting. You know, there's definitely a few things that just, you know, I had this idea and I thought it was so brilliant, and then I tried to do it and it just went south really fast. And so instead of just, you know, abandoning ship, I try and see it through to the end. And even if I'm not happy with it, even if I still wind up, you know, putting it on free cycle or out, you know, in the trash, at least it was, you learned from that, you know, okay, at least I know what not to do next time. So this is another Wissahickon painting. Again, sometimes I do take a lot of liberties with, you know, planting trees where I want them, or moving things around to improve on nature's composition. And then what I love is to do the grass, you know, just how many colors can I get in that foliage. And, you know, sometimes I sort of was, you know, thinking of like confetti, almost like, you know, like at a party where you have all these different colors of confetti sprinkled, or it'll, you know, have that kind of image in my mind when I'm painting. And this one coming up, this is another one from Maine where I worked from a sketch, but I had never seen wild foxglove. And I was like, oh, wow, you know, that's cool. I've only ever seen it in gardens, you know, intentionally planted, and here it was just growing wild. So I took some pictures, and they're also an interesting shape. You know, you have that kind of little, like a little bell shape going on, and I try and just keep things loose and kind of suggest some of the movement that was going with those plants. And that one is oil on panel. So for things that are smaller than like 12 by 12, I usually use the panels. And then for larger pieces, it's stretch canvas. So this one on the right is also the Wissahickon. And there I kind of went nuts with the small brushes. Lots of really tiny brush strokes. Somehow it didn't feel like it took that long. I mean, as you can see, there's, you know, it's little flecks, but it kind of came together pretty quickly. And let's see, I think, you know, I'm trying to think of what else I could say about my work. I always kind of hope it speaks for itself. You know, there's, I guess what I'm striving for is that kind of immediate sense of beauty. And it sounds kind of, you know, I was thinking about that, it almost sounds kind of shallow to say you're striving for what makes something beautiful. That sounds like it might be superficial. But I feel like there is so much stress in the world today, and it's hard to find beauty in the world today unless you live in a beautiful area. But, you know, there's so much going on that I sort of feel like I want my work to be more like an escape into something beautiful. And I want that to, you know, I like when I look at other paintings, I like to think, wow, what makes that work? What makes that so beautiful that I want to keep looking at it, that draws me in? And so for me, a lot of it's color, composition, how colors interact, but I guess beauty doesn't have to be something, you know, shallow, that there can be depth in looking for something just lovely about what I see.
I'd say you succeeded, since
Ah.
it's beautiful.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Laura. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Now we're moving into Shawn Hildreth's exhibition. Hello, Shawn.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I'm just soaking in the fact that Laura said she didn't think that one painting took her that long. And my brain is still making sense of that. For me, I would not have the patience. It's beautiful. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, really, really beautiful.
Thank you.
So for this series, I think I would fall under the column of what Fran mentioned, which was trying out different materials, kind of taking a stab at something a little new, and then also soaking in some new information in the studio that I wouldn't usually be kind of using as inspiration. So a lot of this work is sort of just me processing the past year and a half, 2 years or so, and in different ways. And I guess a way to start off would say there's maybe two bodies of work here. There's one that's kind of looking at where I feel like things are now, and then works that are dealing with where I would, you know, like things to go in terms of the world that we're living in. And some of these works on this wall are sort of the beginnings of me trying to think about, you know, where we might be now. There's a lot of arrows. Somebody during the show said they called me Mr. Arrows. So the arrows are a new motif for me. I have always drawn and doodled arrows since I was a kid. So whenever I'm on the phone or I'm in an awkward, anxious situation, I usually just instinctually draw intertwining arrows. And it seemed to be something that came up during the past year and a half while I was just sort of sketching and processing things. And for me, the arrows turned into a bit of a motif and a simple visualization of what systems of either advantage or disadvantage could look like. So thinking about how an arrow up can signify things that are good and things that are happening well for folks, and then arrows down could be a simple explanation for things not going so well, and for people who might be not thriving. And I mean, a lot of folks are probably in the same boat. Maybe they aren't, but for me personally, it's been a lot of sort of just digesting what's going on in the world and trying to make sense of it. A lot of unlearning from some schooling in my past, and then just learning some new things, and how to express that in a way that might connect to folks, and it might not. But these are some attempts at a new series. And I was saying this earlier, I'm in my classroom in the middle school, and I have a printmaking elective. So this is actually a silk screen. And I was not a good student in art school, and I did not pay attention to anything in my printmaking classes. So I'm actually like co-learning with my middle school students how to create silk screens and relief prints. And the idea of creating a print and having it be mass produced was something I was trying to experiment with this show. especially with creating this visualization of systems of advantage and disadvantage. And for the silk screens that you're seeing, so the behind the scenes of this is a silk screen. And then I'm trying to paint on top of a silk screen to see what kind of things I can do to manipulate sort of the surface texture. And I really like that with a silk screen or a relief print, you get to create this sort of simultaneous relationship of the negative and the positive space. So the only thing that's being printed are the black arrows, and the white arrows are the emptiness and the whole of the paper. And that was something that I really liked working with this new series of work. So with the systems of advantage and disadvantage, this would be in reflection of just systems of racism, so systemic racism, and some specific events that have happened this past year. The far three images here reference George Floyd, Christian Cooper, and Dante Wright. So I'm trying to use imagery from specific events and put them in the forefront. Folks may not get that right away when they're looking at this work, but when you look at the titles and you see the dates, I'm trying to maybe give pieces of a puzzle and let the viewer sort of try to connect the dots and learn along the way. So that's totally new. Work I usually do is doorknobs and hinges. My classic explanation of what I usually paint is doorknobs, windows, and hinges. So this is a total sort of offshoot for me. It's a start of a whole new series. I am trying to keep the things that I've painted involved though. So I do love scenes of street lights, imagery out in the world. However, I am, again, casting a new light on these, no pun intended, with this arrow motif. So for these larger paintings, I was trying to use different sort of vocabulary to explain different things. And one of the ideas I was trying to maybe start to explain with this work is putting a bit of a focal point on white privilege. So me as a white male and a white artist, just reflecting on the role that I have, and maybe trying to pause, and something I would have appreciated before, maybe it's now different because of the things that I've relearned or unlearned, and trying to put that sense of privilege maybe up in the foreground. So these white arrows are able to move freely in this intersection, but I've silk screened hundreds of black arrows in the background, trying to, again, create a visual reference point or a visual expression of white privilege versus black people being oppressed here in the United States through systems of systemic racism or interpersonal racism. So again, lots that I'm trying to think through here with different materials. So all these little arrows are silk screened behind these layers of paint. So things that I'm trying to push and pull with the surface. I also like to keep the white arrows, the bare gesso. So I'm glad Mike put the definition of what gesso is in there during Fran's conversation. And I did that on purpose because Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, she mentions that, systemic racism are systems of advantage and disadvantage. And she also talks about how there is a sense of a self-inflicted wound in terms of being a white person in the United States, and how there's going to be a sense of maybe emptiness that we may understand or we may not. So I just like the idea of the white arrows being empty. So a lot goes into masking off these arrows and keeping them the bare, raw gesso underneath. So that's something I'm trying out with these larger paintings. There's more from these replicated systems of advantage silk screens, and each one of these has a bit of a different reference point. This one's titled White Noise. So I was just thinking about how, if me as a white guy, I'm not trying to take in other experiences. I'm just sending out maybe my own experiences. off to the folks around me. So that's kind of my reference point for that. And the title of this little one is Getting to Know My Neighbor's Hood. And this is just me reflecting on people's reactions to specific events. I've been sort of mortified, but not surprised at some folks responding to the current events around the country, especially seeing people replicating the kneeling on someone else's neck after the George Floyd murder. This is called Bars of Supremacy. So taking the idea of this up arrow, systems of advantage, and down arrow, systems of disadvantage, and just trying to create some simple yet potentially effective symbolic imagery for folks to maybe just try to contemplate. I think a lot of this work is trying to maybe highlight moments in a different way than how I used to highlight them. This is all so new. This is a collaged piece of silkscreen with a relief print with little tiny cutout paper hats. So this is just using all kinds of different scrap papers from the process to create the thing that I still can't understand happened on January 6th, the insurrection there. So this was my processing of that. I think that one's titled Not in My House. So that's me connecting to everybody there that day, refusing to live in the reality we're living in. And I think with these ones, this is again trying to process how to visualize sort of the ability that, you know, being white, I have a totally different experience than somebody who's black or not white, and trying to process that and accept that, and also own that a little bit more than I have been. And it's a totally new space for me to work with. Again, same process here, a lot of different silk screens in the background, and then masking out these white arrows in the forefront. I'm also trying to merge, like I said before, things that I usually love to paint, but just try to maybe paint about them in a different way with this work. And it's something I'm going to continue to do. I love, again, scenes of objects and things in the world, but maybe highlighting the unnoticed privilege of those moments. And maybe if someone else is different, they might have a totally different entry point into the work than myself. Another one of these red lights. Also the idea that, hey, these are red lights, but they don't stop. They go where they want to go. I think that has a lot of a similar attitude or mood from the January 6th piece from the previous wall. The idea of witnessing a lot of folks, a lot of white people, just not knowing A, what's the best response to something, and B, not knowing when to just kind of stop and reflect and settle before acting or responding in a way that only makes things more destructive. And it felt really good to actually use this thing that I've been doing since I was younger, and these drawings of arrows, and using them for the first time in paintings. I've never created a painting that had anything besides realistic things inside of it. So this is a totally new world. I told Mike and Tina, I'm really excited about this series because there's so many different ways for me to pursue this in the future. The top one here is titled The Shape of Supremacy. And this was actually a combination of silkscreen and relief print. And the idea that an arrow going up is pretty darn close to a Ku Klux Klan hood. So the idea that this natural arrow and simultaneous sort of arrow upward was an interesting moment to consider. And then this is through the curation of Tina here, and this is placed over just my visualization of what happened on May 25th with George Floyd. So trying to take some arrows that might seem like nothing too lethal or too threatening, but trying to use them with different color choices and different symbolic meaning to just express some of the things that I've just been thinking a lot about and processing. It was really fun talking to people at the opening and talking about this work and hearing their points of views. I really enjoyed sort of having these conversations with folks about different paintings. And this is just my, again, I'm speaking from the eye here, my interpretation of what I've been viewing and seeing and experiencing in the media, whether it's legislation being passed, the entire election of 2020, and just how, I don't even know what word to use, I would say chaotic, the relationship with the United States Postal Service got, and all of the different parties at play with who's trying to either control the mail, who's trying to control people not getting to the mail, the voices that are silenced. And again, those motifs of shapes of white supremacy kind of sneakily popping their heads out and making their voices heard. And I guess this is because I was living in a world where I didn't think there was active, destructive voices like that still in the world. So it really kind of was a waking up moment for me. And I know the young folks say, you know, oh, you're woke, but I don't really know what that means. I'm just trying to learn more with what I've been witnessing. And again, trying to use mixed media here, that the Postal Service was silk screened on top of the mailbox. So all of these have some kind of printmaking involved that I would have never used in the past. And I guess this is the second part of it, which is where I would like us to go, or at least this is where I would like to grow and go as a person. And these arrows out here on this wall sort of signify how I think as a white person, specifically a white male, if I can be more vulnerable and be more present for other people's experiences that aren't my own, how I can use that to center myself versus centering maybe my own whiteness or me being a white male, and how that can actually start to become a tool to help others. So these gray arrows represent maybe folks who are in the gray area. So they're white people or just, you know, anybody who's sort of in the gray area for things that there should be no gray area on. And the idea of centering these other vibrant colors. So these are all different experiences for me symbolically that are not my own, but they're in the middle of those white arrows now. And they're able to maybe go forward and help those gray arrows that aren't maybe necessarily hearing things that they should, or thinking about things that they might want to consider or reflect on. And these arrows are sort of the beginning of that. They're trying to amplify solidarity, unification, and sort of the power of how we really can change the shape of supremacy into a shape of unity. So instead of it being a shape of, oh boy, there's only upward mobility for these white arrows, it's more of, hey, how do we change the shape in general? So there's more voices that can move upward with us and change the systems that have been keeping some arrows down for so long. These were really fun. I'm excited to do more of these. These were silk screens, and then I would draw on top of the gray arrows with this white ink pen. And it was really fun to sort of just get lost in the motion and the commotion of these funky little arrows. So they're still fun for me. I know there's a lot to unpack with them, and I associate a lot of things with them, but I still want to make paintings and make artwork that is animated. I do like things to become animated and fun for folks to look at. All right, I talked a lot. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Shawn. Right, now we're moving into Jeff Thompson's exhibition. Hello, Jeff.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and thanks, Tina and Mike, again. It's great. Well, as you can see, I'm basically an oil painter who paints representationally. And this show pretty much displays the two things that I principally do, which is one, painting works on site and mostly completing them there, or doing more developed works in my studio. This one is actually a hybrid. It's getting closer and closer. That is, it's a nearby scene that sort of captured my attention, but it started out as it's based on a painting I did on site, but I realized that it needed more attention if I was going to bring out the interest that I had and the emotion that I had upon and the possibilities of this site. So I worked from that painting in my studio, plus notes and sketches. I go by and stand there gaping at the scene and trying to figure out the colors. For example, I knew that, or I thought I knew anyway, that the underpass of the tunnel would work best if I did layer upon layer of thin glazes of earth colors, that is sort of transparent colors, and building up a depth there. And this one is a sketch for a larger project, which is actually on the opposite wall. When I do these large projects, it's a ridiculously extensive process I go through. I do lots of noodling in my sketchbook to work out composition. If there's something odd in it that I haven't worked on before, like a drawing issue, I'll work on that. And then I do, and this is basically a color study and compositional study for the larger piece that, which I guess we'll get to. And this and the other two on this wall are the ones that I do on site. You know, I'm it's frightening up close, isn't it? It's, what can I say? I'm drawn to light and certain shapes and interest of things. My painting process for this and the larger work is pretty much the same. That is, I like to work in layers with glazes that are like, for those of you not in the art business, thin colors of oil paint over the paint below to bring things out, or scumbles, which is a fancy word for more opaque paints over what's below, but still revealing what's below. This is called Things Which Grow in the Early Spring. I have no idea what these things are, but they grow in my yard. The guy who lived here before spent all his retirement planting wonderful things, which from now, every now and then grow. These are tiny little things, and everyone gives me a different idea of what they are. Someone said they're forget-me-nots, but I haven't a clue. Well, the one on the left is another one done on site. The one in the center here is one of these large projects that I tend to grapple with that take me months, if not years. Ideas will start bopping around my head, and if they don't escape through my ear holes, then I just have to paint them. The backstory of this is my wife, that's my wife Kathy, and I volunteer at a local nature preserve where we monitor boxes for birds, little songbirds. They're trying to encourage bluebirds to come back. So starting in April or even the end of March and going through the summer, we go into this preserve, open up the boxes, see what's happening there, see if a nest is being built, and see if eggs are being laid, identify the species from the nest or the eggs, then watch as the chicks grow and terrorize them as we open up and count them. And that's my wife notating what we found. This is yet another painting done on site. As you can see, I like shadow and light and trying to capture that through a combination of thin paint and thick paint. And I do that mostly because that's how I see things, as multi-layered outside rather than big shapes or big spots of color. Sort of like a pulsing life there, which is why I paint in oils, because I can try to achieve that as best I can. And they seem to work the best for me. Animals are another thing that I'm compelled to paint. This is one of our cats. And I'm really interested in the particular expression of animals. So although I kind of paint impressionistically, I can't see myself like, dissolving everything into an impressionist pool of color because I don't want to lose that the interesting part of the animals, which is when I regard them, I see this consciousness. I have absolutely no idea what's going on in that head, but there's something going on there that I find interesting. And so the particular expression of the face, the gesture of the body, interests me highly.
Do they pose for you like that, Jeff?
I shoot them with tranquilizer darts. No, they don't. This is from a photograph, but I draw. I've drawn cats for like 30 years, so after a while you get to know how to do them. Another painting done on site, my backyard. This is titled Flowers After News of Tilda, which was done after the first painting I did after news of the death of a dear friend who I know is a dear mutual friend of many of you. My backyard this year, for some reason, had a bumper crop of daffodils. It's not my doing. I am not a green thumb. But so I spent a couple of days in the yard painting these in April. And that painting in the center there is the larger work of that study on the other side of this room. And you can see that the coloring is quite a bit different. I do a lot of work to get down the composition and stuff before I lay in paint on something this large. And I do that because I learned the hard way. Because in the old days, I would just start painting. I would draw on the canvas and paint. And then after a while, I would come into the studio and say, oh, shoot. Only I wouldn't say shoot. I'd say, oh, shoot, that head that I've been working 5 days on needs to be moved 2 inches to the left. So I realized I need to work a lot of stuff out before I do something like this. And although it sounds labor intensive, and it is, it actually makes things a lot easier, at least for me, especially to achieve the kind of effects I want, the kind of a glow that I saw in that area. This would be another painting done on site. Actually, it's across the street from where I live. And once again, I'm interested in sort of trying to figure out light and shadow, and in figuring out how to paint stone and and the space that steps create. These also were done on site. And both, as you can see, have light and shadow, different times of the year, but, and so the coloring is quite different. So the one on the left is a nighttime painting. One of the things I'm really interested in is what are the colors of things? I know it's a strange question, but it's not as simple as it seems to me. I want to know what the colors of things during the day and also at night. The story on this painting and the one on the opposite side of the wall is that in the middle of the night, I will sometimes get up and look outside the window. And when the moon is up in various stages, it will cast shadows and create interesting shapes and colors. And I will like stand there and try to analyze these colors. I saw, for instance, that the roof of the kitchen, which is below there, in a certain light is the same value as the lawn, but it's a different color temperature. It's a lot cooler than the lawn, which I saw is warmer. And so I thought, well, if they're different color temperatures, then they must be different colors. So what are those colors? And that's when I took stuff which is essentially charcoal gray and tried to, and found, to me, everyone sees color differently. The yellows and the reds that I'm actually looking at in this gray space. I don't recommend anyone doing this if you want a good night's sleep. It's really a bad idea. This is a Mongoose Lemur, for those who don't recognize the animal. I'm like many types of animals, lemurs are tops among them. And once again, this was done with a lot of layering because that's how I see the pulsing life in an animal. A lot of depth of color that goes deep into the fur and through the body. And of course the eyes. Here again, the one on the left is yet another view of or a fanciful view of my backyard. I actually did not see a fox walking through the yard as I stared out the window, but probably like many of you, I've heard them barking at nighttime when the windows were open. So I imagined a fox coming through. So to paint that, I purchased a couple of toy foxes about 3 inches long and 1 inch high and set them up so that I could draw them from the right angle and cast the light on them so that I could get the shadow. But mostly this is about trying to discern the color of what night is, how I see the colors of night. And then finally, another animal, a Canada lynx. And I guess that's it.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Mike.
It's a great show.
Thank you.
And we're heading to Janice Merendino's exhibition. Janice?
Hi there, and thanks again for Mike and Tina for providing this opportunity for us all. All the work in my exhibition is directly or indirectly related to the pandemic, and I entitled this exhibition Between Fear and Refuge. I use the word between because I was never fully in either. In the studio, I seemed to swing back and forth between severe weather as a metaphor for how I was feeling, both environmental concerns and fears, and also the personal need for refuge, the comfort of familiar places. This first piece that you're looking at is entitled Laundry Day, and it's a fond memory of my neighbor's kitchen. This is a link. This is ink directly on paper with no collaged additions. And I consider this part that we're seeing now as the refuge. I went into old photographs of family and friends and looked for happy, familiar places to paint from. All of my work is ink on paper with some collaged layers, some decorative paper, and some additions of color pencil. And I'll explain more of the process as I go. This piece is called Utensils. This was the rack that hung in my grandmother's kitchen. I chose it because it was both meaningful and really fun to paint. My grandmother and my mother showed their love through cooking for their families. So these utensils take on special meaning in our family. On the wall opposite to those utensils, you're going to see more of familiar places for me. In preparing for this talk, I realized how many of my paintings are centered on kitchens. And because they are places that hold happy memories of family and friends, this one is simply called Kettle, the ritual of having tea with a friend. This next one is called Sally Lou's Kitchen. And it's another kitchen with happy memories, a place where a simple invitation to come over for waffles for breakfast turned into a whole afternoon of art, music, and discussions about life. So this is inked directly on paper with a little bit of color pencil. And the next three pieces are also figurative work that I began an ongoing project to paint images of my grandparents' home and my childhood home in Atlantic City, New Jersey. So the one on the left is called Centennial Avenue Altar. I've been trying to get to know my grandmother better through pictures I took of her home in the 1970s. In this one photo, I was really struck by the beautiful arrangement of religious objects, a kind of altar on her dresser. This piece has several layers of decorative papers to mimic the lace doilies that she crocheted and her flower arrangements. I had fun applying the curtains with a transparent piece of paper. This next piece is called Giuseppe's Corner. And it shows my grandfather's chair, his standing ashtray for his pipe, and a view of the dining room leading into the kitchen. I chose soft colors to suggest that it's no longer in vivid focus. It's a memory. I also played with the focus of a once bright medallion rug. I used a fine point ink as well as loose brushwork. And this is a good one to explain more of my process here. I primarily use Japanese papers and ink. I put them together in a wet layering technique called urauchi. It's part of a scroll mounting technique that I learned in Japan, and I revised it to use it in my work. The adhesive that I use is a wheat starch that I cook. And each layer of paper is brushed and applied wet and then allowed to dry taut by adhering the edges of the paper to the table or a special board. And this technique allows me to use layers to play with a sense of time. What happened before might be underneath. What's happening now might be on the surface. And I can also obscure areas and I can reveal areas with the different qualities of the paper. Now, the challenge of this technique is that I have to register all the sections to get what I want, where I want them. And because the paper is wet, it becomes very fragile when I go to lift it. So I could very easily rip what I've done. This piece is about 4 layers of paper. This next piece is called On the Porch, and it's a scene from the block where my grandmother lived. Arrangement of rocking chairs reminds me of the conversations that took place from porch to porch across this very small street between neighbors. It was called an avenue, and you could barely get your car down this little street. So this is a project I hope to continue in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and focus now on the apartment building that I grew up in as a child. Let's start with the one on the left, and I'll call that is called Day In and Day Out. And it's my bed as refuge. During the pandemic, the bed took on a form of a landscape for me. I took pictures of my bed several mornings after I got out of it and the comforter was all messed up. You know, realizing that we get in and out of bed every day, but there was something about it during the pandemic that took on a special meaning. Ink on paper, collaged, and some decorative papers with it. This next piece is a continuation of a series that I was doing related to my uncle, and it's called Behind the Blinds. The blinds are both about the blindness my uncle experienced as a result of AIDS and the life he was unable to share fully with us. I had several pieces related to my uncle in my previous exhibition with Cerulean. This centerpiece is entitled Rain, and it began as a kind of meditation, just a continuous thin line of ink on the surface of the paper. And that line started to remind me of rain, the sound of rain. A little bit of a gray cloud at the top. And then I put another layer of paper underneath that was sliced, and I allowed it to produce kind of a wavering movement depending on how I moved the slices. Below is brushwork, color pencil, and an open textured paper suggesting more water and splashing puddles or storm waters. This smaller piece is called Night Maze. And here I used a stiff bamboo brush where the bristles are formed by making fine cuts into the bamboo stalk itself. It gives a very particular kind of line. In sections towards the bottom, I sliced through the paper and threaded the black strips through the cuts so that they appear to be both on top and underneath. And the feeling in this piece, I was quite surprised after I had created it, was finding my way through a stressful maze with some long, stable lines in the distance.
Janice, can you speak about the long, horizontal, vertical format?
Oh, I'd love to. I've been using this format for quite a while now. I find that the physicality of standing in front of something that relates to your body is almost like an entranceway or a doorway for me. The other thing that it allows me to do, it allows me to divide the work into sections where I can play with time. I can say something at the top happened before something further down, or I could zoom in and have one particular subject matter and then a zoomed in version of it in another place on the canvas. So I really, the vertical format really works well for the types of things that I'm trying to express. I always feel as if we only see glimpses of what's really going on. And I think of those glimpses as little slivers of ideas, not a full idea. And that sliver idea of something being narrow and thin also seems to be the way that suits the way I think about working. This piece is called Frayed Landscape. And in it, again, this is more on the edges of fear, part between my fear of environmental concerns and how the fabric of our environment is fragile and it's coming apart. So although it's still beautiful, there's a weakness in the structure. And that paper has little specks of gold in it. It's probably hard to see from this view, but oh, Tina's going to zoom in for me. Okay. There are little specks in there. They sort of sparkle when you look at it from a different view. There we go. Yeah. And those are in the paper themselves. I didn't add those. So I really do take advantage of lots of different things that the paper allow me to do. This piece is called Sweet Slumber. The top part to me seems as if it's like a soft inhale and exhale as your breathing slows down when you're about to fall asleep. The middle section is slivered and disjointed layers. It's the feeling I get as my mind starts to wander just as I'm about to doze off. And the bottom is the irregularity of the calm sleep itself. And this last piece is called Groins and Gray Sky. I began this piece thinking about staying centered in gray sky and rough waters. My framer suggested that the black stripes at the bottom look like groins, which are the jetties or bulkheads that help prevent shore erosion. Well, thank you. Please visit my website if you'd like to see more of the work.
Thank you, Janice.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Mike.
It's beautiful. So we've come to the end of the tour. Are there any questions for any of the artists? All right. Well, if not, we'll end here. I'd like to thank all artists again for their wonderful work and thank everybody for coming this evening. And hope you can see the show. It's up through November 7th in person, or you can see everything on the website. So thank you and have a great night.